The alarm on my ship screamed before I even opened my eyes. 340 campaigns. 340 times I had heard that same alarm, and 340 times it had meant one thing: the enemy had moved. Somewhere, in the dark between stars, a fleet had shifted position, and my machines had noticed before any living mind could. I am Kael Vordresh. Among my people, the Threnic Dominion, I hold a title that no living commander has held before me. They call me the one who never loses. 340 fleets have stood against me. 340 fleets no longer exist. I sat up in my chair on the bridge of the Ashfall, my flagship, and looked at the screen in front of me. A blue and green planet turned slowly in the black. Small. Fragile. The kind of world that should have surrendered a long time ago. They called it Earth. "Report," I said. My second in command, an officer named Threll, stepped forward. Threll was loyal to the Dominion in a way that frightened even me sometimes. He believed every word of our doctrine. He believed war was not just necessary, but pure. "Their last defense ring has fallen, Commander," Threll said. "What remains of their fleet numbers less than 40 ships? Our fleet numbers over 600. I looked at the numbers again. 40 ships against 600. It was not a battle. It was a formality. And yet, I had studied this species for 3 years now, ever since our scouts first found their transmissions drifting through space. Songs, arguments, laughter, cries for help that nobody in the galaxy had ever answered until we arrived, uninvited, with weapons instead of hands raised in peace. In 3 years, humanity had lost every single battle against me, every one. Their ships were slower, their weapons were weaker, their numbers were smaller in every way that mattered to war. But they had never stopped fighting, not once. Not even when logic said they should. I found that strange. In 340 campaigns, I had seen species surrender the moment the numbers turned against them. Smart species did that. It saved lives. It was the reasonable thing to do. Humans were not reasonable. Humans kept climbing back into broken ships and broken cities, and kept saying no. "Commander," Threll said again, pulling me back to the moment, "do you wish to give the order for final approach?" I looked at the small blue planet one more time. "Not yet," I said. "I want to see something first." Threll's jaw tightened, but he did not argue. Nobody argued with me. Not because they feared punishment, though they did fear that too, but because in 340 campaigns, I had never once been wrong about when to strike and when to wait. I ordered a shuttle prepared. A single human vessel had been captured 2 days earlier, a refugee ship trying to slip past our blockade with civilians aboard. It had failed. Most ships like it did. I wanted to walk its halls myself before I gave the order that would end this world. Some of my officers thought this was strange. Threll certainly did. In our culture, a commander does not walk among the defeated. A commander gives orders from a chair, watches numbers change on a screen, and moves on to the next campaign. That is what makes a commander efficient. That is what makes a commander strong. But I had learned, over 340 campaigns, that numbers alone did not tell the whole story of an enemy. Sometimes you had to see their world with your own eyes to understand why they refused to stop fighting a war they could not win. The shuttle ride was short. I stood in the loading bay of the captured ship a few minutes later, my boots echoing on cold metal floors. The corridors were dim. Emergency lights blinked red along the walls, the kind of light that meant the main power had failed hours ago. The ship was called the Meridian. I had read the name off its hull before boarding. A strange name for a vessel meant to carry frightened families away from a dying world. 2 of my soldiers walked ahead of me, weapons ready, though there was little reason for it. Our scans showed no armed resistance left aboard. Just survivors. Just people waiting to learn what would happen to them next. We passed through a cargo hold that had been turned into sleeping quarters, blankets on the floor, small shoes lined up neatly beside them, as if someone had taught their children to keep their things tidy even here, even now. A child's drawing was taped to the wall. I did not look closely at it. I told myself I did not need to. We found the survivors gathered in the ship's main hall, huddled together, watched over by 2 more of my soldiers. There were perhaps 60 of them. Old, young, frightened, silent in the particular way that only frightened people can be silent, holding their breath as if breathing too loudly might draw attention they could not survive. I looked at their faces one by one. I had seen fear like this on 340 worlds. I told myself it meant nothing new. But there was a woman near the back who was not looking at me. She was staring at the floor, her hands pressed tightly against her stomach in a way that seemed wrong, unnatural, as if she were holding something in, or holding herself together. "Search the lower deck again," I told one of my soldiers, room by room. I want a full account of every person on this ship. Commander, the scans already show. Room by room, I said again, and he obeyed. I do not know, even now, why I gave that order. Perhaps some part of me had already noticed what the woman was hiding, the way her eyes kept flicking toward a corridor at the back of the hall, toward a door that had been sealed and marked as non-functional on our ship diagrams. I walked toward that door myself. Commander, Threll's voice came through my communicator. Command wants confirmation of final assault timing. They are asking why there is a delay. Tell them I am gathering final intelligence, I said. Tell them the delay is tactical. It was not entirely a lie, not yet. I reached the sealed door. It had been welded shut from the inside, roughly, with tools that were never meant for this kind of work. Someone had wanted whatever was behind this door to stay hidden, no matter what. I could have ordered it opened by force. I could have walked away and let my soldiers handle it, the way any other commander would have. Instead, I stood there for a long moment, my hand resting against the cold metal, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, so faintly that my hearing systems almost failed to register it at all, I heard a sound. It was not a weapon charging. It was not a voice raised in anger or in a call for help. It was something else entirely. Something low and soft and rising and falling in a gentle pattern that I had no name for. I ordered the door opened. It took 3 of my soldiers working together to peel back the metal, and when they finally did, what we found inside was a small storage room, barely large enough to stand in. And in the corner of that room, wrapped in a torn piece of blanket, was an infant. The child was awake, small fists curled near its face, dark eyes blinking up at the sudden light, and the strange armored shapes now filling the doorway. Beside the child, propped against the wall, was a small device. A personal recorder, the kind humans used to keep messages for loved ones they might never see again. It was still playing. That was the sound I had heard through the door. I stepped inside and picked it up. The voice on the recording belonged to a woman. Tired. Trembling in places, though she fought to keep it steady. She was singing, if that is the right word for it. Not a battle chant, not a warning. A song meant only for one small, frightened child, meant to make the sound of collapsing hallways and dying engines feel a little less like the end of the world. I did not understand every word. My translation system struggled with some of them, words that seemed to exist only inside this kind of moment, between a parent and a child, words that had no purpose anywhere else in the universe. But I understood enough. Hush now. Close your eyes. I am here. You are safe. I am here. It was not true. She was not there. My soldiers told me later when I finally asked, that the woman who left this recording had died 2 days earlier, in the same corridor collapse that had trapped this child here in the first place. She had used the last minutes of her life to hide her child in the only place that might survive what was coming, and to leave behind her voice, so that the child would not be alone in silence. I stood in that small room for a long time. I have given orders that ended the lives of thousands of soldiers without a moment's hesitation. I have watched entire war fleets burn and felt nothing but the quiet satisfaction of a calculation completed correctly. I am, by every measure my people use, the most effective weapon the Dominion has ever created. And I stood in that small storage room, holding a small recording device, listening to a voice that no longer existed sing to a child who did not yet understand that the voice was gone, and I felt something inside my chest that I did not have a word for. My soldiers watched me. I could feel their confusion, though none of them said a word. A commander does not stand still in front of his soldiers. A commander does not hesitate. I did not know, in that moment, that I was already changing. Commander. Threll's voice came again through my communicator, sharper this time. Command is asking again. They want the order for final assault within the hour. What should I tell them? I looked down at the child, who had stopped crying, and was now simply staring up at me with the wide, uncomprehending eyes that all young things share, no matter what world they were born on. Tell them, I said slowly, that I am still gathering intelligence. I did not know, as I said those words, that I would never give the order command was waiting for. I did not know that this small room, this small sound, this small child, would end a war that 600 ships and 3 years of fighting had failed to end. I only knew that for the first time in 340 campaigns, I did not want to leave. I carried the child back to the ashfall myself. No one questioned me. No one would have dared. But I saw the looks on the faces of my soldiers as I walked through the loading bay with a human infant wrapped in a torn blanket, the small recording device tucked carefully into my other hand. I saw the way Threll's eyes followed me when I stepped onto the bridge. He said nothing. Not yet. I gave orders that the child be kept in my private quarters, fed and cared for by a medical officer who knew how to handle unfamiliar biology. I gave no explanation. In 340 campaigns, I had never once needed to explain my decisions to anyone, and I was not about to start now, even though, for the first time, I did not fully understand my own decision myself. That night, alone in my quarters, I played the recording again. I told myself I was doing this for information. That was the excuse I gave my own mind. Perhaps there was something useful in the recording, some detail about human morale, some weakness I could use to end this war faster and with fewer losses on both sides. That is what I told myself. It was not true. The woman's voice filled the small room. Hush now. Close your eyes. I am here. You are safe. I am here. My people do not have songs like this. We have signals. We have alert tones and command frequencies, and the sharp clipped sounds soldiers use to communicate danger across a battlefield. We do not have sounds meant only to comfort. We stopped having those sounds a very long time ago, though until that night, I had never once thought to ask why. I sat there and played the recording 17 times. By the 7th time, something strange began happening inside me. My hands, which had held weapons steady through firestorms and hull breaches, began to tremble slightly. Not from fear, not from any threat in the room, from something else, something that rose up from somewhere deep and old inside me that I had long since stopped listening to. By the 12th time, I found myself remembering things I had not thought about in decades. My own childhood, if it could be called that, on the homeworld of the Dominion. I remembered, faintly, impossibly faintly, a sound similar to this one. A voice, low and warm, singing something to me before the Dominion's training programs began, before I was old enough to be taken from my family and shaped into what I became. I had forgotten that voice entirely. I had forgotten it so completely that I did not know, until that night, that I had ever lost it. By the 17th time, I turned the recording off and sat in silence for a long while, staring at nothing. The child slept nearby, in a small container the medical officer had adapted for human use. I found myself watching it breathe, in and out. Small chest rising and falling in the dim light of my quarters. It was such a small, fragile thing, and yet it had survived a battle that had killed everyone who was supposed to protect it. I began, in the days that followed, to do something I had never done before in 340 campaigns. I began listening. Not to enemy communications for tactical purposes, not to intercepted battle plans or fleet movements. I began listening to ordinary human transmissions, the kind our intelligence officers usually ignored because they held no military value. Broadcasts meant for entertainment. Recorded messages between family members separated by the war. Stories told to children before sleep. I listened to a recording of an old man telling a story about a rabbit and a turtle racing across a field, and I found myself waiting to hear who would win, the way I imagine a human child might wait. I listened to a woman on a distant colony laughing so hard at something her sister said that she could barely finish her sentence, and I felt something in my chest loosen slightly, something that had been tight for so long I had forgotten it was tight at all. I listened to children singing simple songs about counting numbers and naming colors, their voices uneven and off-pitch in the way that only young children's voices are, and each time, I thought of the small child sleeping in my quarters, and of the mother who would never sing to her again. I began to understand something that no battle report had ever told me. This species did not fight because they were foolish, or because they failed to understand the numbers against them. They fought because somewhere behind every ship, every soldier, every desperate last stand, there was a child asleep somewhere, or a family waiting, or a voice like the one on that recording, promising safety it could not always give. They fought because giving up meant losing all of that, and to them, that loss was worse than any battle could ever be. I began to wonder, for the first time in longer than I could remember, what my own people had been fighting for. I searched my memory for something similar. A song, a story, a voice that promised safety simply because it loved you, not because loving you served some larger purpose for the Dominion. I found nothing. I realized, slowly and with a kind of quiet horror that I had never felt on any battlefield, that somewhere along the long history of the Dominion's rise, we had given up these things on purpose. Songs were inefficient. Stories that did not teach combat lessons were wasted time. Comfort that served no military purpose was a weakness to be trained out of every young soldier as early as possible. We had built the most efficient war machine in the history of the galaxy, and in doing so, we had erased every single thing a lullaby was meant to protect. I did not share any of this with Threll, or with any other officer. I could not have explained it even if I had tried. How do you explain? To a soldier who has spent his whole life believing that softness is weakness, that the softness you have both been trained to destroy might be the only thing worth protecting in the entire galaxy. Instead, I kept the child close. I kept the recording close. And every night, when the ship grew quiet and the corridors emptied of soldiers preparing for a war I no longer wanted to give the order for, I played that lullaby one more time, and I let myself remember what it felt like to be something other than a weapon. Command grew impatient with my delays. I could feel it in every message that reached my quarters, in the increasingly sharp tone of every communication from Dominion leadership demanding to know why the final assault on Earth had not yet been ordered. I told them I was gathering intelligence. I told them I was studying enemy morale for weaknesses. I told them many things that were technically true and completely dishonest at the same time. What I could not tell them was the truth. That somewhere in the space of a single week, a small recording of a dead woman's voice had done something that 3 years of battle had failed to do. It had made me stop and ask, for the first time in 340 campaigns, whether winning was actually the same thing as being right. I did not have an answer yet, but I knew, with a certainty that frightened me more than any enemy fleet ever had, that I was no longer the commander who had boarded that shuttle a week earlier. And I did not know yet how much that change was going to cost me. The child needed a name. I did not decide this. The medical officer caring for her, an old and quiet Dominion soldier named Sarek who had served under me for over a decade, brought the matter to me on the 5th day. She responds to sound, Sarek said. She turns her head when spoken to. It would help her, and help us, if she had something to be called. I thought of the recording. The woman's voice. She had said a name once, near the very end of the message, so softly that I had almost missed it the first several times I listened. Lily. I told Sarek this name, and from that day forward, that was what we called her. I want to explain something about what happened over the following days, because it did not happen all at once, the way I have perhaps made it sound. It happened slowly, in small moments, the way ice on a window slowly clears when the sun rises, so gradually that you cannot point to the exact instant when the frost became water. I began spending less time on the bridge and more time in my quarters. I told myself this was because I was studying human transmissions for strategic value. In truth, I was listening to more recordings, grandparents humming while they worked, children arguing over which stories were the best ones. A father, in one recording I found particularly difficult to listen to more than once, promising his son that everything would be all right, in a voice that made clear he did not entirely believe it himself, but said it anyway, because his son needed to hear it. I thought often about my own homeworld. I had not thought about it seriously in decades. The Dominion trains its soldiers young, separates them from their families early, and replaces whatever softness exists in a young mind with discipline, structure, and purpose. I had been an exceptional student of this training. Perhaps the most exceptional the Dominion had ever produced. But training cannot erase everything. Somewhere underneath 340 campaigns of discipline, there had been, once, a voice singing to a small child who did not yet know what war was. I began to search Dominion archives, quietly, using access that only a commander of my standing could obtain without drawing attention. I was looking for something. I did not know exactly what, until I found it. Old records. Ancient, by Dominion standards, from a time before the current leadership rose to power, before efficiency became the only virtue our culture valued. Recordings, preserved more by accident than intention, of Dominion life from centuries earlier. There were songs. I sat in my quarters and listened to my own people's ancient lullabies for the first time in my life, and I felt something break open inside me that I did not have the words to describe, even now. We had once been like the humans. We had once sung to our children. We had once believed that comfort and safety were things worth building a life around, not weaknesses to be trained out of existence. Something had happened to us. Some war, some crisis, some ambitious leader who convinced an entire species that softness was the reason we kept losing, and that if we simply became hard enough, cold enough, efficient enough, we would never lose again. And we had not lost again, not until Earth. Not until a species smaller, weaker, and less advanced than us in every measurable way, refused, again and again, to accept the ending that the numbers said was inevitable. I began to understand why. Humans had not given up the things we had given up. They had not traded their songs for efficiency, their comfort for discipline, their love for control. And somehow, impossibly, that made them harder to defeat than any fleet I had ever faced. Because you cannot calculate the value of something a person is willing to protect with everything they have left. Threll came to me on the 10th day. I could see, in the careful way he entered my quarters and the stiffness in his posture, that he had finally decided to confront what he had been avoiding. "Commander," he said, "the officers are asking questions. Command is asking questions. You have delayed the final assault on Earth for 10 days, with no clear explanation. This is not like you." I did not answer immediately. Lily was asleep nearby, in the small container Sarek had modified for her. Threll's eyes moved toward her, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not softness, suspicion. "I am gathering intelligence," I said again, the same phrase I had used for 10 days. "You are gathering something," Threll said, his voice sharper now, "but I do not believe it is intelligence." I said nothing. "Commander," he continued, and for the first time in the many years I had known him, I heard something almost like fear in his voice, though whether it was fear for me, fear of me, or fear of what I might be becoming, I could not tell. "There are rumors on this ship. Officers whisper that you have taken a human child into your quarters, that you spend your nights listening to enemy recordings instead of planning our victory. If Command hears these rumors, they will not wait for your explanation, they will remove you." "Let them try," I said, and I meant it, though I had no plan for what would happen if they did. Threll stared at me for a long moment, then he looked again at the small container where Lily slept, her tiny chest rising and falling in the dim light. "I do not understand you anymore," he said quietly. "You were the greatest commander the Dominion has ever produced, 340 campaigns, and now you sit here, delaying a victory that would make it 341, because of a song." "It is not just a song," I said. "Then what is it?" I thought for a long time before I answered him, because I was still, in many ways, trying to answer that question for myself. "It is everything we gave up to become what we are," I said finally. "And I am no longer certain the trade was worth it." Threll left my quarters without another word. I did not know, in that moment, whether he would report what he had seen to Command, or whether some small part of him, buried as deeply as the part of me that had forgotten our own lullabies, understood what I meant, even if he could not yet admit it to himself. I did not have long to wonder. 3 days later, a message arrived from Dominion High Command, addressed directly to me, with a directness and urgency that I had never received in 340 campaigns. The final assault on Earth was to be carried out within 24 hours. No further delays would be accepted. I was ordered to give the command personally, as tradition required of the commander who had led the campaign from its beginning. I read the message twice. Then I looked over at Lily, sleeping peacefully, unaware that an entire species' survival, and my own fate within the Dominion, would be decided in the next day. I knew, reading that message, that whatever I chose to do next would be the last decision I made as the commander the Dominion had built me to be. 24 hours is a long time when you know exactly what is waiting at the end of it. I spent the first several hours of that day doing what any commander in my position would have done. I reviewed the fleet's readiness. I studied the positioning of Earth's remaining 40 ships, each of them exhausted, undersupplied, and hopelessly outnumbered against the 600 vessels under my command. I confirmed weapon systems, shield calibrations, and approach vectors. Everything was in place for a swift, decisive victory. My officers were ready. My fleet was ready. Command was waiting for a single word from me to end a war that had lasted 3 years. I could not make myself say it. Instead, I sat in my quarters with Lily in my arms, something I had not done before, though Sarek had shown me the proper way to hold her days earlier, in case it ever became necessary. She was awake, watching me with the same wide, uncomprehending eyes she always had, unaware that the fate of her entire species rested on choices being made just beyond the walls of that small room. I played the recording one more time. "Hush now. Close your eyes. I am here. You are safe. I am here." I thought about the mother who had recorded those words. I did not know her name. I would never know her name. But I understood, in a way I could not have understood before boarding that shuttle 2 weeks earlier, exactly what she had been protecting, and exactly what I had been sent to destroy. Threll came to my quarters 4 hours before the deadline Command had given me. He did not wait for permission to enter, which told me, before he said a single word, that something had already changed between us. "Commander," he said, and his voice was cold in a way I had never heard from him before. "I have reported what I have seen to Dominion High Command, the child, the recordings, your delays. I could not remain silent while you endangered everything the Dominion has built." I looked at him, and for a moment, the old part of me, The part built by 340 campaigns of discipline, considered what punishment such an act of disloyalty would once have earned. I said nothing about it. I understand, I said instead. Threll seemed almost thrown by my calm. You understand, Commander? They will relieve you of command within the hour. They may do far worse than that. You have thrown away everything you built for the sake of an enemy child and a song. It is not just a song, I said again, the same words I had told him days earlier, though I finally understood, standing there with Lily in my arms, exactly what I meant by them. Then explain it to me, Threll said, and there was something in his voice now that was not quite anger. Something closer to desperation, as if some part of him wanted an answer that would make sense of everything, that would let him go on believing in the life and the doctrine he had built his entire existence around. Explain why you would give up everything for this. I thought about how to answer him, and in the end, I did not answer with words at all. I walked to the communication console in my quarters, the one connected to every ship in my fleet, 600 vessels waiting only for my order to descend upon Earth and end its resistance forever. Threll watched me, confusion and alarm both plain on his face, clearly expecting me to finally give the order command had been demanding for 2 weeks. Instead, I opened a channel to the entire fleet, and I played the recording. Hush now. Close your eyes. I am here. You are safe. I am here. The lullaby played across 600 ships, into the ears of soldiers who had never once heard a sound like it in their entire lives. Soldiers who had been trained from childhood to associate softness with weakness and comfort with failure. I do not know what I expected. Perhaps I expected nothing at all, some final act of defiance before command removed me from my post. But as the recording played, and as I watched the confusion and discomfort on Threll's face slowly shift into something else entirely, something almost like recognition, I began to understand that I was not the only one aboard that fleet who had once, somewhere in a forgotten childhood, heard a sound very much like this one. When the recording ended, I spoke into the same channel, my voice carrying to every ship under my command. For 3 years, we have called this species weak because they refuse to accept defeat, I said. I have come to believe we misunderstood them completely. They are not weak. They protect something we gave up long ago, something I only remembered because a dying mother's voice reminded me of it. I will not give the order to destroy that. Not today. Not ever. Silence followed. A long, uncertain silence across 600 ships. Then, slowly, responses began to come in. Some officers demanded explanations, confused and angry, unwilling to accept an order that contradicted everything the Dominion had trained them to believe. A handful, a very small handful, transmitted something else entirely. Quiet agreement. Uncertain, hesitant support from soldiers who, like Threll, had perhaps also heard something in that recording that stirred a memory they did not know they still carried. Threll stood in my quarters for a long moment after the transmission ended, staring at me with an expression I could not fully read. Command will not accept this, he said finally. They will send another commander. They will remove you, perhaps permanently. You understand this? I understand it, I said. And still, you would do this. Throw away 340 campaigns, your entire legacy, for a species that is not even your own. I looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep in my arms sometime during the transmission, entirely unaware of what had just happened, entirely unaware that her survival, and the survival of everyone on the small blue planet below us, no longer depended on numbers or weapons or fleets. I am not doing this for a species that is not my own, I said quietly. I am doing this for the part of my own species that we lost a long time ago. I only needed a human mother's voice to remind me it ever existed at all. Threll left without another word, and I did not know, in that moment, whether he would follow me, report me further, or simply disappear into the chaos that I knew was about to follow. I did not have time to wonder for long. Within the hour, the first fractures in my fleet began to appear. The fleet split within a single day, faster than I had expected, though perhaps not faster than it should have. Roughly 400 ships remained loyal to Dominion doctrine, unwilling or unable to accept a commander who had refused a direct order from high command. They withdrew from Earth's system entirely, retreating to await the new commander that I knew Dominion leadership would send to replace me, and likely to remove me from command permanently, one way or another. The remaining 200 ships stayed. I did not order them to. I want to be honest about that because I have thought about it many times since, and I still do not fully understand why they chose to stand with me rather than with the doctrine that had shaped every one of their lives. Perhaps some of them, like me, had simply been waiting a very long time for permission to remember something they had never truly forgotten. Threll was among those who stayed, though it took him several more days to tell me why. When he finally did, he said only that he had gone back, after our conversation in my quarters, and listened to the recording again on his own. He said he had not been able to stop thinking about a memory from his own early childhood, something he could not fully explain even to himself. A sound that felt like it belonged to that lullaby, though he could not remember the words or the voice that had once sung it to him. I did not press him further. Some things are private, even between soldiers who have fought beside each other for years. I sent word to what remained of Earth's defense forces, requesting communication rather than surrender. It took time for them to trust that the message was genuine. I understood their hesitation completely. Why would they trust the commander who had led 3 years of war against them, simply because he claimed, without proof beyond his own word, to have changed his mind overnight? It was Lily, in the end, who helped convince them, though she never said a single word in the negotiation, being far too young to speak at all. I sent footage of her, safe and cared for aboard my ship, along with the recording that had started everything. I explained as honestly as I could what had happened aboard the Meridian and what that small storage room had shown me about the war I had been fighting. A representative of what remained of Earth's forces, a woman named Grace who had lost most of her family in the early years of the war, finally agreed to meet with me in person. I do not think she trusted me, not fully, not for a long time, but she agreed to take Lily, to find out if any surviving family existed for the child, and to see, with her own eyes, whether the commander who had destroyed so much of her world had truly changed as much as he claimed. I gave Lily back to her people. It was, without question, the hardest thing I have ever done, harder than any of the 340 campaigns that came before it. I had grown attached to her in a way I never expected, in a way my training had told me was impossible for someone like me. Grace took Lily gently, and for a long moment, she studied my face, searching, I believe, for some sign of the deception she still half expected to find. "Why?" she asked finally. "After everything, why would you do this?" I thought about how to answer her, the same question Threll had once asked me, though I understood now that the answer had grown clearer with each day since. "Your people fight because you remember what you are protecting," I said. My people forgot. I did not know that until I heard a voice that was not even meant for me, promising safety to a child in the middle of a war. I could not destroy the thing that voice was protecting once I understood what it was. Grace did not answer immediately. She looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, then back up at me. "That does not undo what your people have done," she said. "It does not bring back everyone we lost." "No," I agreed. "It does not. I cannot undo the past. I can only choose not to add to it." She nodded slowly, though I do not think either of us believed, in that moment, that trust between our two peoples could ever be fully rebuilt. Some wounds do not close simply because a war ends. But the war did end, at least between my fleet and what remained of Earth's forces. Dominion High Command sent a new commander within weeks, as I had expected, along with orders for my arrest and removal. I was branded a traitor to the Dominion, my 340 campaigns erased from official record, as though they had never happened. My name replaced in Dominion history, with a warning about the dangers of what they called emotional corruption. I did not fight the accusation. In many ways it was true. I had been corrupted, if that is the word for finally remembering what my own people had given up centuries ago. The 200 ships that had remained with me scattered eventually, some returning quietly to Dominion territory to take their chances with whatever punishment awaited them, others choosing to remain in human space, uncertain of their welcome but unwilling to return to a doctrine they could no longer fully believe in. I stayed as well, though not aboard a warship any longer. Earth's surviving governments were, understandably, unwilling to allow the deadliest commander in the galaxy free movement across their recovering world. I accepted whatever restrictions they placed on me. I had, after all, spent 3 years trying to destroy everything they were now trying to rebuild. Months passed. I learned, slowly and imperfectly, how to live among the very people I had once been sent to erase. It was not easy, for them or for me. Many still looked at me with the fear and hatred that 3 years of war had earned. I did not blame them for it. I had earned every bit of it. But some, slowly, began to see something else when they looked at me. Grace was one of them. She brought Lily to visit occasionally, once she was certain enough that I posed no danger to the child she had taken in as her own. I remember the first time I tried to sing the lullaby myself. Lily was older by then, old enough to sit up on her own, old enough to reach towards sounds she liked and turn away from ones she did not. I held her carefully, the way Sarek had taught me so long ago, and I tried to recreate the sound I had heard through a sealed door on a dying ship. I was terrible at it. My voice was not built for this kind of sound. It came out low and uneven, missing the gentle rise and fall that had made the original recording feel like safety itself. Grace, standing nearby, actually laughed, the first time I had heard her laugh since we met. But Lily did not seem to mind. She reached toward the sound anyway, the way infants do, drawn simply to the fact that someone was trying, however badly, to comfort her. I understood, in that moment, something I had not fully understood even after everything that had happened. It was never about the perfect sound, or the perfect words, or even the perfect voice. It was about someone choosing, in the middle of everything that could go wrong, to offer comfort anyway. That was what my own people had traded away, centuries ago, in exchange for efficiency and discipline and victory after victory after victory, and that was what I had spent 340 campaigns failing to understand, until a single recording, meant for one small child and no one else in the entire universe, finally taught me. I do not know what will happen to the Dominion now that I am gone from its ranks. I do not know if others like me will ever hear something similar and choose, as I did, to put down their weapons rather than pick them back up. I hope some of them will. I do not know if hope is something my people ever properly understood either, before I found it again on a dying ship above a small blue planet that refused, against every reasonable expectation, to stop fighting for the people it loved. I was once called the deadliest commander in the universe. 340 campaigns, and not a single defeat. I lost the only war that ever truly mattered, and I have never once regretted it. Some nights, when Lily visits and falls asleep in my arms despite my terrible singing voice, I think about the mother who left that recording behind. I never learned her name. I do not know if I ever will. But I think, somehow, she would understand why I chose what I chose, even if my own people never will. Hush now. Close your eyes. I am here. You are safe. I am here. I finally understand what those words were always meant to protect.